Christine McVie. What if I told you that the official story you heard about a legendary singer's death wasn't even close to the truth? For months, the world was told she slipped away peacefully after a short illness. That was it. That was the whole story. No details, no explanation, just a quiet, dignified sentence that let everyone grieve and move on. But then, a piece of paper surfaced. A single document that cracked the whole thing open and revealed a final battle so brutal, so layered, that even seasoned doctors were stunned by what they read. This is the real story of what happened to one of the greatest voices rock music ever produced. And honestly, by the end of this, you'll never hear her songs the same way again. Let's set the scene. On November 30th, 2022, fans everywhere woke up to heartbreaking news. Christine McVie, the soul of Fleetwood Mac, had died. Her family's statement was gentle, careful, almost protective. She'd passed peacefully in a hospital following a brief illness. That was all anyone got, and honestly, that was all anyone felt they had a right to ask for. So the world assumed something soft had taken her. Maybe her heart just gave out quietly in her sleep. Grief does that to us, doesn't it? We reach for the gentlest version of events, because the truth is, sometimes too heavy to hold right away. So nobody pushed, nobody asked. The full story sat locked away in an official record for months, untouched. Then, in April 2023, a celebrity news outlet got hold of her death certificate, and what was written on it did not match the peaceful narrative the public had been given. Not even a little. The listed cause of death was an ischemic stroke, which happens when blood flow to part of the brain gets cut off, and that tissue starts dying from lack of oxygen. But here's the thing. The stroke wasn't the whole story. It was the final domino in a chain that had been falling for a while. The certificate also noted that blood flow to both of her kidneys had been restricted, that there was a large clot sitting inside one of the chambers of her heart, and that she'd been dealing with atrial fibrillation, an irregular heartbeat that dramatically raises your risk of a fatal stroke. This wasn't one gentle illness closing the curtain slowly. This was multiple systems failing at once, each one making the next one worse, all while the outside world had absolutely no idea. And that's before we even get to the part that really stopped people in their tracks. Buried in the certificate was a diagnosis: metastatic cancer of unknown primary origin. Now, metastatic simply means the cancer had already spread beyond wherever it started, planting itself in new parts of the body. But unknown primary origin is the chilling part. It means doctors could find the cancer everywhere it had traveled to, but they could never pin down where it actually began. The trail led everywhere except back to the source. Medically, this is called cancer of unknown primary, and it's considered one of the cruelest diagnoses in all of oncology. According to the American Cancer Society, it accounts for roughly 2 out of every 100 cancer diagnoses. Rare, sure. But rarity isn't what makes it terrifying. Speed is. Fewer than 1 in 4 people who get this diagnosis are still alive a year later, and fewer than 1 in 10 make it to the 5-year mark. It's a cancer that hides from the very people hunting for it, while it spreads aggressively underneath the surface. By the time anyone notices, it's often already too late. And here's where it gets almost poetic, in the saddest possible way. Christine McVie was the most private member of one of the most exposed, chaotic, tabloid-drenched bands in music history. While her bandmates lived loud, messy, headline-grabbing lives, she stayed quiet, guarded, almost unknowable, even to people who thought they knew her well. And in the end, the thing that took her life was a cancer that kept its own origin hidden even from the specialists fighting to save her. A private woman, taken by a private killer that simply refused to reveal itself. Looking back, she may have actually been trying to tell us something. In one of her final interviews, she opened up about being in fairly rough health, mentioning a chronic back issue that had worn her down and left her unsure whether she'd ever perform again. She described it simply as her spirit being ready, even though her body wasn't cooperating anymore. At the time, everyone assumed she just meant the normal aches that come with getting older. Nobody had any idea what was actually lurking, unseen, in the background. But to really understand why her passing hit so hard, you have to go back. way back. Before the platinum records, before the sold-out stadiums, before she was even McVie at all. She was born Christine Perfect on July 12, 1943, in a tiny village tucked into England's Lake District. Yes, Perfect really was her birth name, and if you think that's a rough thing to carry through school, you're right. She used to laugh about how her teachers would tell her they certainly hoped she'd live up to it. Later on, she'd joke that she managed to stay perfect right up until the day she got married. Her childhood home was anything but ordinary. Her father was a concert violinist and music lecturer, and her grandfather had once been an organist at Westminster Abbey. But it was her mother who gave this whole story its strange, almost otherworldly flavor. Her mother was a medium, a faith healer. Someone who genuinely believed she could channel forces beyond the physical world. And young Christine believed it too, with her whole heart. She used to tell a story about a woman who was terminally ill, completely out of options, until her mother handed her a single glove to wear overnight. By morning, the story went, the illness had simply lifted. Christine grew up surrounded by the idea that there were things moving through this world that couldn't be measured or explained. Hold on to that thought, because it's going to matter later. She started classical piano at just 4 years old, precise and disciplined. She might have quietly grown up to become a piano teacher in some sleepy English town, except her older brother left a stack of Fats Domino records lying around the house one day. The moment her fingers found those rolling, joyful boogie-woogie rhythms, something in her cracked wide open. The polite classical girl was gone, and something wilder had taken her place. She enrolled in art college to study sculpture, but instead found herself pulled straight into the smoky, electric British blues scene of the 1960s. And let's be honest, the blues clubs of that era were a rough, unpredictable place for a young woman to plant herself. She joined a band called Chicken Shack as their keyboardist and singer, and almost instantly, people realized this art student had a voice that could silence an entire noisy room. Low, warm, lived in. The kind of voice that seems to already know exactly how your heart is going to break before you do. In 1969, her cover of I'd Rather Go Blind became a genuine hit, and Melody Maker named her Britain's best female vocalist 2 years running. Around this time, she'd grown close to the bass player of an up-and-coming blues outfit called Fleetwood Mac, a man named John McVie. They married in 1968, with the band's brilliant, troubled guitarist Peter Green standing as best man. The girl who'd been teased for her surname became a McVie, and that name would follow her straight into music history. For a while, she orbited the band without officially being part of it, playing uncredited piano on their records, and even painting the artwork for one of their album covers. Then fate cleared a path, though it came through someone else's heartbreak. Peter Green's mental health deteriorated, and he left the band suddenly. So in 1970, they turned to the woman who'd been standing just off to the side the whole time, and asked her to join for real. Mick Fleetwood would later describe her as the glue, the one thing holding a group of volatile, brilliant, deeply flawed people together. Then, on the very last day of 1974, 2 Americans walked through the door, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. The moment Christine and Stevie sang together, their voices locked in like they'd been doing it their whole lives. The 2 women made a quiet pact early on that they'd always insist on being treated as complete equals in a band full of men. What happened next is almost impossible to believe. As the band pushed toward recording what would become their masterpiece, every single relationship inside the group fell apart at the exact same time. Christine and John divorced. Stevie and Lindsey's relationship imploded. The drummer's marriage was crumbling too. They were heartbroken, furious, and could barely stand to be in the same room. And then they walked into the studio together anyway and poured every ounce of that pain directly into the songs. Christine, right in the middle of her own divorce, somehow wrote some of the warmest, most hopeful music the band ever made. She wrote, "Don't Stop," a song reaching toward better days ahead. While her marriage was quietly falling apart, she wrote, "You Make Loving Fun," a giddy love song actually inspired by an affair with the band's lighting director, letting her soon-to-be ex-husband believe it was written about their dog. And then there's the song that proves her mother's strange, mystical world never really left her. One night, around 3:30 in the morning, Christine woke up with an entire melody already complete in her head. She walked straight to the piano and played the whole thing through in about 30 minutes. She later described the experience as feeling almost spiritual, like she'd been visited by something. She was so afraid of losing it that she stayed up the rest of the night, playing it over and over, so she wouldn't forget a single note by sunrise. That song became Songbird, and Mick Fleetwood has said he loves it so much he's asked for it to be played at his own funeral one day. The album, of course, was Rumors, and its success is almost hard to comprehend. It sold somewhere north of 40 million copies, and across their whole career, the band has moved well over 100 million records. But with that kind of money and pressure came a lifestyle that would have crushed a lot of people. Christine was remarkably candid about it later, admitting that cocaine and champagne had basically become her go-to combination during those years, describing a world where the drugs were simply everywhere, just part of the daily grind. At one point, she stayed awake for 3 straight days, until her own racing heart terrified her so badly she thought she might be having a heart attack. That fear was enough. She walked away from it completely and never looked back. There was more heartbreak too, beyond the substances. She had an intense, consuming relationship with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, someone she once described as magnetic, charming, and a beautiful disaster all at once. Just a few years after their relationship ended, he drowned at only 39 years old. Loss seemed to trail her quietly no matter where she went. Underneath all the fame ran a constant undertow of pain the public never saw. Chronic back problems, crippling stage fright, the exhaustion of being a deeply private person trapped inside a touring machine that never, ever stopped. At heart, she was just an English country girl who wanted nothing more than muddy boots and a garden to tend. And instead, she spent years bouncing between airplanes and identical hotel rooms, performing her own private heartbreak for thousands of strangers every single night. By the late 90s, something finally broke. She developed a genuine, paralyzing fear of flying, full-blown panic attacks and all. So in 1998, right at the peak of her fame, freshly inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Christine McVie did something almost no superstar in her position ever does. She walked away, from the band, from the spotlight, from all of it, and disappeared quietly into the English countryside. She bought herself a grand old Tudor manor house in Kent, and set about becoming the country woman she'd always secretly wanted to be. She gardened. She restored the house piece by piece. But 16 years is an awfully long time to stay away from the one thing you were born to do. The reason she stayed gone so long was that flying phobia, which had wrapped itself around her like bars on a cage. She'd escaped the road, sure, but she was still trapped, just by her own fear instead. And the way she finally beat it will give you chills. A therapist gave her one simple piece of advice: buy a plane ticket to Hawaii, where Mick Fleetwood happened to be living at the time. So she did exactly that. She and her old bandmate boarded a flight together, and as the plane lifted off the runway, the fear that had gripped her for 16 years simply let go. She described the feeling in one single word: free. So in 2014, after 16 long years away, Christine McVie finally came home. She rejoined Fleetwood Mac, and the classic lineup stood together on a stage once again. It'd also be a mistake to think of her as just one voice inside a bigger band, because she released solo material too, and pulled in some seriously heavyweight talent to help her make it. Eric Clapton himself walked into the studio and laid down a guitar solo for her. That album gave her a genuine solo hit with Got a Hold on Me, which climbed into the American top 10. She picked up a Brit Award for Outstanding Contribution to Music, and an Ivor Novello Award for Lifetime Achievement along the way. She wasn't just filling out the sound of a famous band. She was one of the finest songwriters her country ever produced, full stop. Which brings us back around to the goodbye none of us saw coming. The friendship between Christine and Stevie Nicks turned out to be one of the great love stories in music, a real, lasting sisterhood. Stevie considered her the best friend she had in the entire world. They shared hotel rooms, did each other's makeup, laughed their way through decades together. So when Christine fell seriously ill at the very end, it happened so fast that Stevie barely had time to process what was going on. She was ready to charter a private plane and fly straight to London just to sit by Christine's bed and sing to her one last time. But the family gently told her not to come, because Christine likely wouldn't survive the night. And the very next day she was gone. Stevie never made it there. She never got to hold her hand or say a proper goodbye. Afterward, she wrote an emotional handwritten message to fans, saying she'd just lost her best friend in the world and hadn't even known she was sick, closing with words about hoping to see her again someday and asking not to be forgotten. Mick Fleetwood said part of his own heart had flown away that day. Lindsey Buckingham called her a musical partner, a friend, a soulmate, and a sister all rolled into one. And so we land on the heaviest truth of the whole story. Without Christine, there simply is no Fleetwood Mac left to speak of. Mick Fleetwood has said plainly that a line has been drawn, that continuing on now feels unimaginable. Stevie Nicks put it even more bluntly. Without Christine, there's no path forward at all. The glue holding this group of brilliant, complicated people together for 50 years was finally gone. She spent her career handing the world some of its most hopeful, comforting songs, all while quietly carrying a weight none of us could see. And in the end, she was taken by something so elusive that even her own doctors couldn't trace it back to where it began. A killer without a face. A secret kept right up until her very last breath. The most private woman in rock and roll. Mysterious to the final note. So here's the question for you. Which Christine McVie song still gives you chills, all these years later? And do you remember exactly where you were the first time you heard it? Drop your story in the comments. I genuinely want to hear it. And if this kind of deep dive into the real stories behind the music is your thing, stick around, hit that like button and subscribe, because there's a lot more of this coming.